that the description is given very nicely. Although it is my writing, I know it is not my writing. It is Krishna's writing. So we should read the Bhagavatam always. Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. We should not waste our time. This is not the first time that Prabhupada has said that when he writes, he is simply acting as a mouthpiece for Krishna. His words and humility today merely emphasize his role as a transparent via media between us and Krishna, and gave us another glimpse into the intimacy of his relationship with the Lord. So that was a very direct statement from Srila Prabhupada. At that moment when I was writing, it came. Yeah? I couldn't do that now. So he said, therefore I understand when I'm writing, it's Krishna speaking through me, that's all. Yeah. And therefore Prabhupada's Bhagavatam is so potent. Yeah. This is the true meaning of the transparent via media, that Krishna is apparent through the personality of the living Bhagavatam, or the Guru, the representative. So, again, Tamal Krishna Goswami had a little exchange with Srila Prabhupada. This was on June 26, 1977. He was with Srila Prabhupada. He said, in the evening, when I expressed my appreciation for Srila Prabhupada's books, Prabhupada began to cry. And he said, I am only a child, but I have tried to please my Guru Maharaj. I have not written. It is Krishna. Krishna and my Guru Maharaj. So again, another confirmation there. I saw sometimes Prabhupada would sit and read his own books. And Prabhupada would say, this is not my books, this is Krishna. All of us should read it. So he enjoyed that. Okay, so Prabhupada was, his main focus was on writing. As he developed ISKCON, writing was still his focus, but his attention was drawn to so many other different things. And as soon as he was able, Prabhupada created a managerial structure, and he handed over the daily management of the movement to his disciples so that he could do his writing. And there are scores of letters, if you look in the folio there, where Prabhupada mentions, if you can just learn how to manage, then I can do my real business, which is my writing. I want to retire and just write. And he repeated that many, many times. So Prabhupada then, as I mentioned before, sometimes he would sit in his room, we would chat with him, and he would recall, his pre-ISKCON days. So one such time we were in Melbourne, 1976. This was on April the 22nd. We were waiting for some guests to arrive, so myself and Pushta Krishna Swami, who had been made Prabhupada's secretary at that time, we were just chatting with him. So these informal conversations are always extremely sweet, and they give us the opportunity to ask specific questions and also to sometimes find out more details about Prabhupada's past activities. Pushta Krishna Maharaj asked Prabhupada if many people had come to hear from him before his coming to the West. People were coming, Prabhupada said, but he had no time to visit many places or people because he was busy with his writing. To me, it seemed very significant that Prabhupada had reversed the usual trend. Generally, someone retires and dedicates their remaining days to writing, but Prabhupada wrote, and then he came out to teach his writings by practical example. And Pushta Krishna added that he didn't think that Krishna consciousness would have had much effect upon people without Srila Prabhupada's personal example. Prabhupada modestly agreed. That was the example of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he said, to teach by personal example. So you can imagine, actually Prabhupada's books did come to the West before Srila Prabhupada. He had sold 17 sets of his first canto to the American consulate in Delhi, or some branch of the American consulate, and they had immediately shipped them out to America, and they were actually sent to different universities. So when Prabhupada arrived in America, then he went down to Butler for 1 month, and then on the way up to New York from Butler, he had gotten some contact with some professor at, I think, Philadelphia, the university there, and he had been invited to talk. So when he went there, he naturally went and asked them to buy his books and put them in the library, but they already had them. So Prabhupada's books got there before Prabhupada himself. So I think that's pretty significant, you know, the importance of Prabhupada's books. So July the 11th, 1976, we got a confirmation from another source that Prabhupada was spending most of his time writing. This was a letter from Yasamati Nandan Prabhu in Gujarat. So he had just gone up there sometime before. We had visited there the last week of 1975. We'd gone up to Ahmedabad in a place called Sanand, where Prabhupada did some pandals there for about 6 days. And on the way back to Bombay, we had gone to Ahmedabad, and Yaso had taken Srila Prabhupada to see a property that he was thinking of renting, and he wanted to see if Prabhupada thought it was suitable or not for our purposes. So he was there, and he was just getting things going, and they were trying to get the Back to Godhead going there, etc. So Yasamati Nandan Prabhu wrote describing a highly successful Rath Yatra in Ahmedabad. It was organized by local temples, so we didn't actually organize it, but the Mahant of the local Jagannath temple had presided over it. The devotees had a kirtan on the back of a truck during the parade, which the whole city populace witnessed. By simply leaning over the truck's side, they sold 1,500 newly printed Gujarati magazines, Bhagavad Darshan, without even getting off the truck. Yasamati Nandan said that he felt that it was a record for Indian book distribution. However, because they aimed at making sure that everybody got one, they only charged 1 rupee each. So he was only making 20 paisa profit on each magazine. Yasamati Nandan's description of how they got to participate was interesting. It was by your direct mercy that we got a place on the truck, he said. Because when we met the Mahant at the Jagannath temple, he refused to see us because he thought that we were hippies. Then there was another sadhu standing there, and he knew your divine grace very well. So he said, "Oh, you were disciples of Bhaktivedanta Swami?" We said, "Yes." So he went to the Mahant, and then he introduced us. So then the Mahant said, "Okay, so then they can come on Tuesday and join in the temple truck with a few sadhus of their own." So that's how we got in. So this sadhu's name was Narayan Das, and he is the Mahant of the Nilkant Mahadev Ranji Mandir in Vadigram. Have you been there, Maharaj?
Probably.
Vadigram? Alright. So he said that your divine grace had stayed with him for almost 6 months in his ashram 15 or 20 years ago. He was nice. And he said Swamiji was a great scholar and was giving lectures in the ashram every day. All day he was writing on the Bhagavatam. He was eating only once, and in the evening taking just milk. So that's a good, accurate description of Prabhupada. He always had his glass of milk last thing in the evening about 9:30, and generally one main meal, and that was it. So he's saying he noticed Prabhupada was simply writing at that time. So that was Prabhupada's preparing to go to the West. So then, of course, as soon as Prabhupada arrived in the West, not the first few months, but after a little while, especially once he got 26 Second Avenue, Prabhupada started attracting a following. people started coming, listening to his lectures on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Friday nights. There was an advertisement, Bhagavad Gita classes. And then, as they took more interest, they started taking up more of his time. So initially, you know, he was typewriting and doing his writing as usual. But then people would come in and he would, you know, have to deal with them. And so gradually, as ISKCON grew, then Prabhupada's time for writing was reduced. So it became impossible for him practically to write during the day. So what to do? So he started setting up a system. One of the first things that he discovered was the dictaphone, electronic writing. Prabhupada was very innovative, you know, whatever the technology was, he was quite willing to take advantage of it and use it in Krishna's service. So apparently he'd seen some doctor using, you know, a dictaphone, you know, and he was dictating his letters, leaving it on the tape, then the secretary would take it away and type it up. So Prabhupada thought, oh, very good, that would be very useful for writing, it would speed up the whole process. So immediately he wanted to get one of those. So then, because he was very hectic in the first 9 months of ISKCON's existence, he got new disciples, he had to train them up, he had to start engaging them in various ways, keep them occupied. They were incapable of sitting down and chanting 64 rounds a day, so Prabhupada had to think about ways and means of engaging them, and at the same time taking advantage of their youthful energy for spreading Krishna consciousness. January 67, he went to San Francisco, another instant temple. As soon as he arrived at the airport, 50 people were there to greet him, chanting, Mukunda had gone ahead. And in this way, you know, things were rapidly developing, and then you can read, you know, how Prabhupada was really physically straining himself, you know, that mantra, rock dance, and all these different things. So then at the end of May, on the Labor Day weekend, then Prabhupada had a severe heart attack, and he was actually paralyzed down one side of his body. He was fainting, he was showing very severe symptoms, and they had to rush him to the hospital. So he was in the hospital for a few days, and then the doctors decided that they wanted to do some experiment. They wanted to look inside his brain. Yeah, so when Prabhupada heard that, he told the boys, get me out. So they called the doctor. Prabhupada told them, he said, I'm all right, I can leave like this. But the doctors were reluctant. They said, no, he's not recovered. We have to look and see what's happening. And this is very amusing, because it wasn't amusing at the time, but looking back, there's an amusing description that Gargamuni gave, where Prabhupada was on one of these moving trolleys, and instead of lying down, he was sitting up and he was chanting. And Gargamuni was wheeling him down the corridor, and Prabhupada had told him, get me out. So they were on a different floor, and Gargamuni couldn't quite remember where the room was. So he was going here and there through the corridors with Prabhupada on the trolley chanting, trying to avoid the doctors. Anyway, they got into the room, and then the doctors came, and they really heavied out, you know, these young men. I mean, Gargamuni was only about 20 at that time, and Satsvarup, the others were there, and then the doctors were telling them, if you take him out now, he's going to die, and you will be responsible. So they were basically telling these boys that you're going to take the old man out and kill him. But Prabhupada was saying, no, you know, take me out. So they stuck with Prabhupada's advice, not the doctors, and they took him away. Then, you know, many symptoms were there for many months. Prabhupada kind of started to recover a little bit, because one of the first things that he did, he had his disciples massage him constantly, and that constant massage restored the use of his you know, got rid of the paralysis that was there. But still, you know, he was very, very sick. He ended up going back to India for some time. He was there for some months in Vrindavan. He got treated by this Ayurvedic doctor there. Being in that climate, then that was very helpful. That was, you know, Prabhupada's body was naturally adjusted to the Indian climate, so even though it was midsummer in Vrindavan, probably temperatures of about 48 degrees, you know, the loo blowing, but somehow or another it was good for Prabhupada. And the last comment that we had was that Prabhupada was quite critical of his godbrothers for not producing books of their own. He said after 40 years, they were still only selling Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's books, but they had nothing to show of their own. So, again, that topic came up. 21st of August 1976, Prabhupada was in Hyderabad. He had just opened the temple there and installed Lord Jagannath, Baladev and Subhadra. Gaunitai and Sri Sri Radhamandan Mohan were already installed. At that time they were the biggest deities in the movement, 6 feet tall, Radha Krishna. Later on, of course, then we got Radha Madhav in Mayapur, then we got Panchatattva, 7 feet tall. So now they're not the biggest, but they were at that time. Anyway, so it was a very successful temple opening. Prabhupada observed his Vyasa Puja there also. The chief minister of the state came. Later on, the endowments minister, he arranged for Srila Prabhupada to have a private discourse to, I think, 7 or 8 cabinet ministers of the Andhra Pradesh government. So it was quite, you know, substantial what was going on. So Jayapataka Swami and Gagamuni Maharaj, they had flown in from Calcutta just for the opening of the temple. And on the 21st, they were having their final darshan with Srila Prabhupada. So along with Gagamuni Maharaj, he heard from Srila Prabhupada of the proactive stance that he is taking against all the false propaganda. That's Jayapataka Maharaj. At that time, there was some disturbance in India. The Communist Party was just coming up. They were very suspicious of ISKCON because most of the leaders were Americans, and we were thus, by association, CIA. It sounds ridiculous, but it was actually being taken very seriously. The question actually came up to the Indian Parliament, but because of the preaching work of Tejas Prabhu, he was kind of like a lone warrior there in Delhi for several years. But Prabhupada had given him the task of preaching to the government ministers and making them all our life members. So by 1976, practically maybe 2/3 of the entire parliament of India were all ISKCON life members. And Tejas had such a good relationship that with the Home Minister, Mr. Channareddy, no, not Channareddy, Brahmananda Reddy, he could practically walk in his house any time he liked without an appointment. He was so close with them. So Prabhupada, when we arrived back from the last world tour in mid-August, it was to this, you know, steady barrage of anti-ISKCON propaganda. There was a tabloid called the Blitz. You can imagine with a name like the Blitz what kind of a newspaper it was. So they were printing so many anti-ISKCON things in there. And even Prabhupada's own godbrothers, you know, were suspicious that, yes, you know, he had nothing when he left India. Now he comes back 3 or 4 years. He's got all these Americans with him. He's He's got money coming out of his ears practically, you know. So where did he get all that from? It must be that the CIA is paying them off. Yeah? He's getting paid by the CIA to set up these temples, and they're just fronts to the CIA operatives. So even his own godbrothers were sometimes thinking like that. So Prabhupada was telling Jayapataka Maharaj, because they were over in Calcutta, and that was where one of, the main, it was just about to fall to the communists about 6 months or 7 months later. So that was where a lot of the propaganda was coming from. And Prabhupada informed his sannyasis that he was writing to Mr. Channa Reddy, one of the state governors. I'm writing one letter to the governor that I work hard, I print my books, and they are selling. And if I bring the money to construct a temple, then why are people envious? What is the wrong there? Rather, I should be encouraged that I'm bringing so much money in India, foreign exchange, by my very, very hard labor. So why are they envious? Gagamuni said that he felt it was difficult for them to believe that a sadhu could possess such money from selling books. That may be beyond their dream, Prabhupada said. But I am not a so-called sadhu. I am trying to execute the orders of my Guru Maharaj, predecessor. I am not a so-called sadhu, taking a saffron robe and begging for fulfilling the belly. They have to accept you as an international leader, Gagamuni said. I must be international leader, Prabhupada agreed as a matter of fact, adding that such a huge sales of a single person's books, especially philosophical and religious works, was unique in history. He laughed and he said that the public generally considers such literature as untouchable. Thus, he said, his feat was even more remarkable. Observing that the Mayavadi, Vivekananda, had produced only one small booklet, thus spake Vivekananda, and that two of his own leading godbrothers, Bon and Tirtha Maharajas, have not been able to produce any substantial literature. Prabhupada said they were chalas, bluffers, who make a show but have no real assets. What is that? Bon Maharajas? Institute for Indian Culture and Philosophy? But where is your book? Now that was a swat at Bon Maharaj, because the year before, our library party devotees were going around the universities in America and achieving tremendous success and appreciation. Reviews were flowing in from different professors. Practically every week a new batch of favourable reviews would come. And Prabhupada was keeping all of those in the secretary's files. There were two files actually. There was a standing file, and any material that Prabhupada felt was useful for his ongoing preaching, he would have the secretary keep that in the standing file. Then there was a running file, which was the daily letters that he was writing, and that would be cleared out every couple of months or so, and those letters would be sent to BBT in Los Angeles. So Prabhupada, he sorry, I've lost the track now. Hang on a second. What was I saying? Bon Maharaj. So Prabhupada, he had received some letters from his library party reporting that they had been to one or two universities, and the university professors there had been very negative. And the reason why was because Bon Maharaj had been there before them, and he had told them not to buy Bhaktivedanta Swami's books. So he was making some propaganda against Srila Prabhupada, not just against ISKCON, but against Prabhupada's books, which means against Prabhupada himself. So Prabhupada was very unhappy with that, and he had ordered the devotees not to allow Bon Maharaj to come to any of our temples anymore, and to avoid any association with him. So there was some, again, it was a kind of an envy that Bon Maharaj was, considered to be a scholar. There was this incident which I narrated previously about Akinchana Krishnadas Babaji and Bon Maharaj, they had a conversation just not long after Prabhupada's disappearance. I wasn't personally there, but Akinchana Krishnadas, he had challenged Bon Maharaj basically, that what's the difference between you and Swami Maharaj? Yeah. He was a learned scholar, you're a learned scholar. He speaks fluent English, you can speak fluent English. He went to the West, you went to the West. He was successful, you were not. Yeah, why? And then he answered, because he had great faith in the holy names. Yeah, of course, by implication that means that Bon Maharaj didn't, but not as much. Anyway, so Bon Maharaj was, you know, a little bit envious of Prabhupada's success. Prabhupada did something that he could not do. And even though he was advertising that he got this, you know, Institute of Oriental Studies in Vrindavan that he had set up, he had not even been able to produce a single book of his own. So that was the criteria that Prabhupada judged. Yeah. Right, Maharaj is saying that he had the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, but he only actually did the first part of it. He never even completed it. So that was it. So Prabhupada knew very well, you know, that his godbrothers, at least you can see, he felt that they were not successful in part because they weren't actually capable of preaching very well. Yeah, their realizations. If you have realization, you write it down and you share it with others. And that's what Prabhupada was doing. He often said that his purports were his transcendental ecstasies. So, anyway, he noted that in his godbrothers, none of them have produced any books. So book writing was Prabhupada's main focus. That was what he was doing before he started ISKCON, and he continued to do it all the time that he was developing ISKCON also. He never lost that focus. He was very determined, because that was substantial. You know, what you achieve in management today is lost tomorrow. It's like the shifting sand dunes. It seems to be a big pile, but then the wind blows and then it all drifts away. That's management. But when you write a book, it's like, you know, a pyramid, a sphinx. It stays there over time as a monument. So Prabhupada, you know, he also said that when I've printed a book, I feel like I've conquered the world. Yeah. So 1970, July 27th, Prabhupada sent a letter to Sat Swarup and Uddhava. And he said, "You're all my children, and I love my American boys and girls who were sent to me by my spiritual master, and I have accepted them as my disciples. Before coming to your country, I took sannyas in 1959. I was publishing BTG since 1944. After taking sannyas, I was more engaged in writing my books without any attempt to construct temples or to make disciples like my other godbrothers in India. I was not very much interested in these matters because my Guru Maharaj liked very much the publication of books than constructing big temples and creating some neophyte disciples. As soon as he saw that his neophyte disciples were increasing in number, he immediately decided to leave this world. To accept disciples means to take up the responsibility of absorbing the sinful life of the disciple. At the present moment, in our ISKCON campus, politics and diplomacy have entered. Some of my beloved students, on whom I have counted very, very much, have been involved in this matter, influenced by Maya. As such, there has been some activity which I consider as disrespectful. So I have decided to retire and divert my attention to book writing and nothing more."
What year was it?
This is 70. The ISKCON Press was specifically established to help me in getting all my manuscripts printed as soon as possible. It is specifically for exclusively printing my books. Please therefore give me an idea how you can help me in getting all my manuscripts printed as soon as possible. Whenever Advaita is submitting an estimate for printing my books, I am supplying the money immediately. So far the finance is concerned, Krishna is supplying. Therefore, if you simply print my books in the press incessantly, that will give me great delight. And he said, I asked George, Prabhupada's got this book that he needs to publish. And he said, as soon as I said that, I saw George's face. Like, right, oh no, here he comes, And anyway, he had to continue on. So he said, Prabhupada was, could you provide the funds for that? And then before George could answer, there was this big storm that was going on outside, like a mega storm. It was raining like anything, there was thunder, there was lightning. And then just when he asked that question to George, and he could see George's demeanor, somewhat changed. Here it comes, he's going to ask me for money. Then all of a sudden, boom, the whole house got hit with lightning. And it knocked all the electricity out. So there was suddenly, it just went, bang, and then, the whole house was reverberating. And the lights went off, and they're sitting there in the dark. Right? And then after a minute or two, the lights suddenly came back on. And George was sitting there with this huge grin on his face. And he looked at Sean, he said, I can't say no after that. So, anyway, that was how they got the money for the Krishna book. And of course, the Krishna book, who knows how many thousands of Krishna books have been sold all over the world on the basis of George Harrison's introduction, that was printed there. I remember selling hundreds of Krishna books simply on that one thing. We go on the street, you get some young person. This book was, published by George Harrison. He spent $19,000 to print this book. How much will you give? I will show, his introduction.
It was right there in the introduction.
Yeah.
He wrote the preface or something. So
he wrote his introduction.
Yeah, and his name was there with the signature. So he just opened it and showed people, and it was very impressive.
That was it, yeah. We didn't bother with the book. We just said, this is George Harrison's. And we would sell it. So, anyway, George Harrison did some amazing service. There's no doubt about it. Anyway, so on June the 13th, 1976, Prabhupada had come to Detroit, and he met a mother and a son. So this boy, he had been in the temple for a short while. He was very sentimental, and then he left. But in the meantime, somehow or another, his mother had become interested in Krishna consciousness. So when Prabhupada came, the two of them came to see Srila Prabhupada, and she seemed to be more interested than the boy was. Anyway, this boy was very sentimental, and so he started, telling Srila Prabhupada, he said, my heart has been captivated by the person that first introduced me to you, George Harrison. So he's talking figuratively, of course, right? That he found Krishna consciousness through George's songs, or maybe he bought a Krishna book. And Prabhupada innocently, he said, George Harrison, oh, you came with him? So the boy explained, I first became interested several years back in what you were writing, especially when I began to see the tie with what he was singing. So now the music that he's doing right now reflects what I'm looking for myself. Satsvarup Maharaj said that it seemed that the boy was more a follower of George than Srila Prabhupada. So out of respect for Srila Prabhupada, the boy didn't want to have to make such a distinction. So Satsvarup, openly said it. Seems like you're more interested in George than Srila Prabhupada. So the boy said, no, he said, I see the two of you I see both of you standing together. I don't see you apart. That's why I'm here right now. So he thought George Harrison and Srila Prabhupada Prabhupada were equals. Prabhupada smiled. He could understand that the boy wasn't too philosophically inclined. So he was congenial, offering him encouragement through his own interests. Thank you. This boy George, he is also nice. He comes to me. He offers me. He has given one great big estate in London, and he has financed my first Krishna book. It required $19,000. So I asked him that I have no money. If you can pay, I can print. So he gave immediately. So I have admitted. So you have seen my Krishna book? Just show him. The boy smiled. Oh yes. I feel that I'm personally in debt to him as well as being in debt to you at this point in my life. Referring to George once more, Prabhupada repeated, he's a good boy. So one time we were in New Vrindavan, and Prabhupada told a nice story to illustrate how the material scientists are simply bluffers. This was on June the 28th, and we were discussing scientists and their bluffing. Prabhupada told us a funny story about Gopal Ban, who was the court jester in West Bengal during the reign of Raja Krishna Chandra. So by it, Prabhupada cleverly illustrated how the scientists obtained their grants. So he said the Mohammedan governor of the day, he had asked him, now, Gopal Ban, I heard you're very expert. Can you write a similar book as the Mahabharata about my kingdom? Oh yes? Why not? That is not difficult. So he took with him some hundreds of thousands of rupees advance. And again he came. Oh, give me another 10,000. Then again he came. Oh, give me another 10,000. So in this way. So, when will the book be finished? You've taken so much money? No, it's just on the verge of being finished. So then when he saw no more money can be taken, oh, I've taken so much already. So he said, now sir, one information, very essential. You give me, and your Mahabharata will be finished. Everything is there. Oh, what is that information? Now, your wife. How many husbands does she have? What is this? What is this nonsense? Huh? No, that is the main subject matter of the Mahabharata. Draupadi had 5 husbands, the Pandavas. So you're such a great person, your wife, she must be having at least 1 dozen. Otherwise, how will the Mahabharata be written? What? This is the subject matter? Yes, it's the only subject matter. Draupadi had 5 husbands. So you're such a big Nawab, your wife must have at least 1 dozen. So you give me their names. So he became very angry. Don't talk this nonsense. Then I cannot finish your Mahabharata, and I've already invested all the money. So then he took another 10,000 and said, and the Nawab said, all right, stop all this nonsense, that's all right. So Prabhupada was laughing all the way through his telling of it, making comical gestures as he relayed the foolishness of the Nawab and the sharp wit of Gopal Ban in taking advantage of his combined ignorance and pride. So these rascals, Prabhupada said, meaning the scientists, they are writing Gopal Ban's Mahabharata, and the rascal government is paying them. They'll never be able to produce anything, and you challenge them. As soon as you say, make an egg, oh, that we cannot say. And they chant chemical evolution, and get the Nobel Prize. Rascals. But how people are so foolish that they can believe this. That was a source of amazement for Prabhupada, how people were so, foolish, just blindly accepting whatever they say, complete awe and reverence, and they never question anything. And just a few pertinent questions, you can immediately expose their whole bluffing, as Prabhupada did. So that was one of the things that Prabhupada trained us up in, how to expose the bluffs of the material scientists. I have to apologize for not attending last night's closing ceremony. Unfortunately, I was not informed, and I decided to do some work instead. I didn't know that we were actually having it. So before we go ahead, I'd just like to express my appreciation to the organizers of the festival, especially Alaukika-prema and Sauri Prabhu for making this facility available. I've been to one or two of these different camps, and over the years I've been to some big ones in Russia and Ukraine, some smaller ones in Czech Republic, and of course I live in Mayapur, so we have every year our main Purnima festival there, and we have other ones, Nishringa Chaturdasi, which has become a big event also, etc. So I think it's worth mentioning that I found this festival to be particularly very sweet, very nice, and sometimes, you know, festivals can get too big. There's too much happening. This is a nice size. Everybody's enthusiastic, and you know, the programs have been very nice. The prasadam's been very nice, and I hope that in the future I'll be able to attend again. So thank you all again for inviting me. It's been well worth the visit. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Okay, so we'll go on. We finished off yesterday talking about the letter from Srimati Maharaji and the mistake that Prabhupada said his editors made in not being able to distinguish between Satyam Bruyat, Priyam Bruyat. Means, you know, you can speak the truth or you can speak nicely, but they rarely go together. But he said, in the society of devotees, we speak the Satyam, we're not so much concerned with the Priyam. Yeah, we have to speak the truth because we're all expected to be self-realized souls. Or at least we're headed that way. So, you know, a few home truths, as we say, are taken, you know, in a mood of loving concern and correction rather than criticism and envy. Yeah, so we don't reject frank talks. That's part of, you know, the exchanges that Rupa Goswami recommends for making our advancement in devotional life, that we have to speak or be able to speak confidentially to each other. That means frankly. So Prabhupada was speaking frankly to Srimati Maharaji. Her sentiments were disturbed, but as he said, you know, we're actually just speaking on the basis of Shastra, so even that may be a little unpleasant to hear. Still we have to accept it. We can't change the Shastra to suit our sentiments. So later on, of course that was August the 6th, later on Prabhupada was in New Delhi on August the 28th. We just arrived there from Hyderabad after the temple opening there, and it was Radhastami. In Delhi also, we had just gotten a new temple during the summer at Lajpat Nagar 3, and it was like a semi-detached house, not much bigger than this house here, but it was an improvement on what we'd had previously in Delhi, and Prabhupada went there and did a little Pandal program. So on the 28th, Prabhupada received a letter from the editor of Back to Godhead, because every issue they would send about 5 or 10 copies to Srila Prabhupada from the first batch. So Jagannath Sutadas, the editor-in-chief of Back to Godhead, sent a letter along with 10 copies of the latest edition, volume 11, number 9. He expressed his desire to be allowed to continue assisting His Divine Grace in pushing on Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement. Prabhupada was pleased to receive the magazines, and he humbly replied, "Actually, I am dependent on your mercy. If you kindly follow my instructions and continue to push on Krishna consciousness, that will make me very happy. You must very strictly observe the regulative principles and chant 16 rounds a day, and Krishna will give you guidance." This is also stated in the Bhagavad Gita, Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam pritipurvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mamupayanti te. To those who worship him with love, Krishna gives the guidance so that they can come back to him. The more you serve Krishna, the more you become advanced. Yashadeve parabhaktir Yatadeve tata guru tasyati katita hiyata prakashante mahatmana. Only to those great souls who simultaneously have implicit faith in both the Lord and the spiritual master are all the imports of the Vedic knowledge automatically revealed. This is the secret of success. Then Prabhupada added a note about Srimati Maharaji's recent complaint. By the way, there has been some disturbance created by the publishing of a few comments on Vallabhacharya in the Back to Godhead, Volume 10, Number 8, Page 5, Column 3, Paragraph 2. Kindly avoid such comments as these in future publications. So, that was Prabhupada's last word to his editors. As I mentioned yesterday, it did go on a little bit with this fellow, this Pujari in Bombay, pursuing the issue and then finally committing so many offences that he was arrested and thrown in jail. So, anyway, that's a bit of stuff about editing of Back to Godhead, or any magazine. One has to be careful what you say in public. What you say in private is one thing, but as Prabhupada used to say, you can say any damn thing, but when you put it in writing, you have to think about it 1,000 times before. So we have to, have a little common sense about what we're presenting, especially for the public consumption. Okay, so Prabhupada, of course, right from the very beginning, he established the principle of writing himself, and he also recommended to his disciples that they write. And he used to say, whatever your realizations, it doesn't matter, you write them down. That way, the exercise of writing actually helps to bring forth from our murky minds clear realizations and focus on the philosophy and practice of Krishna consciousness. So it's a very useful exercise. We write primarily for our own purification. That's the first principle. And then after that, we may write, if we actually know something, for the benefit of others. So Prabhupada, right from the very beginning, he engaged his disciples in writing. Of course, he had Hayagriva, who was an English editor, or his English editor. He was an English professor. Many of the boys that came, Satsvarup, Brahmananda, they were all college students, or had been, and very intelligent. So Prabhupada, as soon as possible, he revived the publication of Back to Godhead. I mentioned the other day that the last editions of Back to Godhead had come out in 1960, I think 11 editions, and then after that, no more. He worked exclusively on the Bhagavatam. So as soon as he came to America, got a little bit established. Of course, Prabhupada's work on the Bhagavatam had to go on. That was his main work now. But he still had plans for Back to Godhead magazine, and so what he did was he handed over responsibility for publishing the magazine to his disciples. So that was the first vehicle that Prabhupada provided for the writings of his own disciples to go public. So some discussion then on BTG. May the 15th, 1976, Prabhupada was in Honolulu. and he gave a class on one of his most quoted Srimad Bhagavatam verses, 6th canto, chapter 1, verse 15, which describes that ultimately only by the performance of Kevala Bhakti, pure unalloyed devotional service to Krishna, can the weeds of sinful actions be destroyed without any possibility of their arising again. Niharameva Bhaskara, just as the sun dissipates the fog. So as soon as one comes to this conclusion, Prabhupada said, that Krishna is mine and I am Krishna's, then by this consciousness automatically all the reactions to sinful life becomes washed. When there is fog, you try so many ways, it cannot go. Then somehow or another, if the sun rises, immediately finished, immediately becomes clear. So this is our motto on the Back to Godhead magazine. Godhead is light, and nescience is darkness. Where there is Godhead, there is no jurisdiction of darkness. So, nice motto that Prabhupada had there. And this phrase, Niharameva Bhaskara, I remember standing one time on the balcony of the Lotus building with Srila Prabhupada in about early February, I guess, of 1976, and at that time of the year in Mayapur it's very nice. In the daytime it's warm and sunny. In the evenings it becomes a little cool. So in the morning times, as some of you may have experienced, you get this ground fog. Yeah, it just hangs very low. It's very cool, and it hangs very low across the fields. You can sometimes see the trees sticking up above it. It's very beautiful, actually. But then, when the sun comes up, then within a short time, as the sun's rays increase, the fog dissipates. It doesn't vanish all of a sudden, but it just gradually evaporates. So this particular morning, Prabhupada just had his breakfast. He came out of the bathroom. He was looking out over the balcony, over the fields. The fog was there. The sun was just coming up. Prabhupada looked, he said, Niharameva Bhaskara. It was very nice. So the fog of our consciousness is removed by this mentality that Krishna is mine and I am Krishna's. If we have that fixed determination, then all gradually, any misunderstandings, misconceptions, any illusions that we're entertaining in our brains, that will all be dissipated by the Son of Krishna rising within the heart. So Prabhupada chose that nice motto for the Back to Godhead. Godhead is light, nescience is darkness. Where there is Godhead, there is no jurisdiction of darkness. Now, of course, Back to Godhead, it was probably the first publication whenever we set up a new foreign language BBT. That one of the first things that they would do is produce a magazine. They would take the articles from the English Back to Godheads, translate them, and then publish them in their own languages. So, similarly in France, I mentioned about the Srimad Bhagavatam coming out in French. So on August the 5th, 1976 in New Mayapur, Prabhupada met with Yogeshwara Prabhu, who was more or less the production manager of the French BBT at that time. So he had a question about the French Back to Godhead. So he said, on the front of Back to Godhead magazine, in the English edition and other language editions, they have kept the phrase, Godhead is light, darkness is nescience. Where there is Godhead, there is no nescience. Now, in French, that is difficult to translate, because I mentioned before, Professor Chanik had been concerned about the Bhagavatam, that it not smell of English. So they were, wrestling with this phrase for the Back to Godhead masthead, how to put that in French. So he said, now in French it is difficult to translate that. There is no word for Godhead. If you say God is light, in French it sounds very impersonalist. In French, Dieu est luminaire. So God is light. But many groups say like that. But we use the word Godhead. and that distinguishes us from other groups. Now, is that phrase very important? And do you want us to keep it on the front of the magazine? Prabhupada nodded. There is a little difference between God and Godhead. Ishvara Parama Krishna. Ishvara, more or less everyone. But Ishvara Parama, that is Godhead. The Mayavadis, they do not distinguish between one Ishvara and another Ishvara. So that may be in the ordinary level. But there is Paramishvara. So Yogeshwara suggested another alternative. Well, one possibility would be to say that God, the Supreme Person, is light. That we can translate. God means Supreme Person, Prabhupada agreed. But these Advaitavadis, Mayavadis, they have made everybody God. God means the Supreme Person, and that is the dictionary word, Supreme Being. God does not mean ordinary, but they have made ordinary anyone God. I am God, you are God, he is God. Then what is the meaning of God? Therefore we say Godhead, Yogeshwara said. Yes, head man. There are many men, but he is the head man. In India, are familiar with the concept of meditation, or have even practiced some form of it themselves, the actual purpose of meditation is rarely understood. The man's lack of knowledge became apparent when he explained that he thought that the goal of meditation was to make the mind silent. This is the common thing. Meditate, make your mind silent. Prabhupada immediately corrected him, saying it is not possible to silence the mind. He recounted a recent Back to Godhead article where a woman disciple had analyzed the fallacy of that idea. Prabhupada greatly enjoyed the article, in which the girl described how she had read in a book that meditation means to free the mind of all thoughts. So she considered, how can I be without thoughts? I will think of being without thoughts. And that is also a thought. Therefore she concluded that it was bogus, and she threw the meditation book away. So Prabhupada read that, he said, she's very intelligent, this is very good, he liked it. So he said that the point is to think of God. This alone is the real goal of meditation, and there is nothing higher. And I remember my own personal experience. The first magazine that I ever purchased on the topic of yoga, we bought it, actually we were just, myself and 3 friends were emigrating from England to go to Australia in 1971, and we set sail from Southampton. So on the way to Southampton we had to stop for a few hours in London and get a train. So whilst we were wandering around, I went into newsagents and there was a magazine on yoga, and at that time, maybe about a month before, I just started getting an interest in yoga. I was very excited that even there's a magazine on yoga. So I purchased it straight away. And I thought, I'll read this, you know. We've got 1 month sailing to Australia, so it'll give me something to read. And so when I read it, I got very, very disappointed, because the whole magazine was about doing exercises, hatha yoga. That was the bulk of it. And I remember telling one of my friends that, you know, if I have to do this, it's going to take lifetimes, yeah, to do yoga. And then there was one article that was about meditation, and I thought, well, that would be more interesting. So the whole article, it showed that there was a line drawing of a table just like this, and on the corner of the table there was an apple. And the whole article was about how to meditate on the apple on the table. And that's meditation. Yeah? You just stare at the apple until your mind becomes blank or something. So when I read that, I just got so disappointed. I thought, this is completely... I mean, I didn't know anything about yoga. I didn't know the difference between yoga and yogurt. had no idea. But when I read that, I just thought, what is the point, looking at an apple, So I was really disappointed. I was fortunate that as soon as we arrived in Sydney after 1 month, then on the second day off the ship, we bumped into the devotees on the street. They were selling Back to Godhead. And I purchased my first Back to Godhead with this picture on it, this Rasalila picture. It was a number 37. When I saw that picture, I couldn't figure out what was going on. We got back to the hostel that we were staying at, we were looking at it, and nobody could figure anything out. One guy that we met on the boat, his name was Bill, he was from Glasgow. He looked at it, he said, "Ooh," he said, "I think those blue fellas are spirits." Right, all the Krishnas. So I think they're spirits. That was as close as we got at that time. But, that magazine was alive. I tried to look in it, I tried to read it, I couldn't understand a word. It was like double Dutch, as we say in English, double Dutch. Dutch is not bad enough, but double Dutch is even worse. But somehow or another, I didn't throw it away like I threw away the yoga magazine that I had on the boat. I just tossed it. I knew. I just thought, there's something about this magazine, I have to keep it. It was like it was vibrant or something. So I just knew, this is important, I have to keep this. I'll read it later on when I'm ready for it. And of course, from that one magazine, from the BTG, that was how I became a devotee. I never read any other books. I just read that Back to Godhead. Later on I came down, we've been working up in the northwest of Australia on the mining camps for 6 months. I got to the point where I couldn't tolerate it anymore, and I had to go and find the devotees. And then on the way back to Sydney to find the people that had sold me the magazine, I stopped off in Melbourne, and some devotees had started up a little branch there. And again, I saw them in the city square, and I bought 3 more Back to Godheads. And from reading those, then I had this kind of, I think they call it an epiphany, a moment of, stark realization, and that was it. I made up my mind, I'm going to join this place, this temple. I've never been to one before, but that was all from the Back to Godhead. So the Back to Godheads were very, potent things. Anyway, so to get back to the topic here. Back to Godhead, very important magazine. So on June the 11th, 1976, Prabhupada had made a special request. I mentioned how the artists used to paint for the BBT, and whenever there was a new publication coming out, they would send sketches of what they wanted to do. Prabhupada would look at them and approve them, or he would make corrections. So in Los Angeles, where the BBT was situated, he had a meeting with the artists. So on June the 11th, this was the last day that we were there, Jadharani, another artist from the BBT art department, were granted a special audience with Srila Prabhupada in mid-morning. They showed him the new paintings and sketches that they had done for the 3rd part of the 7th canto, which is due to be published soon. If you remember, on May the 10th in Hawaii, that's 3 weeks before, Prabhupada finished the 7th canto and started the 8th canto. So now, just 3 weeks later, they were already practically on the verge of being ready to publish it. They were and become so efficient, so they were just going over the paintings for that. Prabhupada gave his approvals and advice, carefully looking over each one. During the meeting, he made a special request of Jadharani. There was a photograph of himself published in a recent Back to Godhead, issue 13/4, where he is shown leaning back on a saffron-coloured bolster. A bolster is like a round pillow, long sausage kind of shape, on his left elbow. His right knee is up. His right hand is resting on his foot. He has a wonderful beaming smile on his face, and he looks completely happy and satisfied. So Prabhupada had seen that picture. He said, "Oh, this is very nice. Good picture." So then he said to Jadharani, he said, "Now you can paint this picture, make a portrait." He liked it so much. So unfortunately she never did that. Many years later I saw her in Vrindavan. This was in the mid-90s, I think. And I asked her, I always wondered about that, whether she actually ever did it. So I said, "Did you ever paint that painting of Prabhupada that he asked you to do?" "What painting?" "You know, the picture of Prabhupada in the Back to Godhead." "What picture?" "Totally gone. You know, never did it." So if somebody's an expert artist, you want to do something pleasing for Srila Prabhupada, get that picture and paint it. You'll like it. Okay, so a bit about the foreign editions of Back to Godhead. I mentioned before, Yasamati Nandan Prabhu had gone to preach in Gujarat, in Ahmedabad. He wrote and told the story of how they'd gone on that Rath Yatra parade on the back of the truck, and they had sold 1,500 of the Gujarati Back to Godheads just by sitting on the back of the truck. So on February the 15th, 1976, Prabhupada was in Mayapur during his massage. He heard a letter from Yasamati Nandan in Ahmedabad. So he is preaching steadily and has rented a house for the next 3 months and is beginning to make wife members. His main focus, however, is on publishing transcendental literature. He plans to print the Bhagavad Gita in 3 parts, and he's beginning to collect subscriptions to a monthly Gujarati edition of Bhagavat Darshan, which is the Indian equivalent of Back to Godhead magazine. So, Back to Godhead in other languages, as Yogeshwara had encountered, was a little difficult to exactly translate. So in India, the equivalent became Bhagavat Darshan, seeing the Supreme Lord. He described a fairly elaborate idea for raising thousands of subscriptions even before the magazine comes out. Prabhupada was extremely pleased to hear of his preaching efforts. "I'm very pleased with your monthly Bhagavat Darshan. This is a solid program. Please continue it steadily. Yes, I approve your distribution ideas, namely subscriber agents and news agents. The subscription drive is a solid program. And if you regularly publish and get it registered, you can get 1 or 2 paisa in the charges on the postal fee concession. Because if you're doing thousands of magazines, that adds up. Even if you get 2 paisa, which is like a cent, it adds up if you're doing thousands. Also in the future, there are many cities such as Bombay, Surat, Calcutta, with large numbers of Gujaratis, and you can arrange for getting subscriptions there." So I like that idea of subscriptions. Another edition that was just coming out at that time, February the 25th, 1976 in Mayapur, Prabhupada got a letter today from Dina Dayal Das on his preaching in Greece. Greece, of course, is not that far from here, right? Just a little bit further down.
1,000 kilometers.
1,000 kilometers. Not much. So, he has acquired an apartment in a good area of Athens, just near the British Embassy. Bhakti Jan and Rohini Kumar have joined him. They held a grand opening ceremony in an auditorium. They obtained police permission to hang a poster with Prabhupada's picture on it all around the city to advertise the opening. Over 150 people attended. Dina Dayal has begun translating prayers and articles from Back to Godhead into Greek. So again, that was their first effort. Back to Godhead was there. It's easy to produce a magazine, so immediately began work on that. April the 21st, 1976, Prabhupada was in Melbourne, and there was a report from the Spanish BBC. So Paranjan reported that they're about to send another Bhagavatam volume and the first of the Krishna books to the printers. The Portuguese Bhagavad Gita is now being typeset, and the Portuguese Back to Godhead is almost complete. So that's English, and then Gujarati, and French, and Greek, and Spanish, and then also Hindi. The point about writing about science. Prabhupada was on a morning walk in early December of 1975. Alan F. Das was there from Europe, and he mentioned to Srila Prabhupada that they were going to write a magazine defeating the different scientific propositions. And Prabhupada stopped and he said, unless you are expert, you cannot do it. He said, I can do it. I can challenge the scientists because I know the philosophy. But he said, unless what you write is expert, he said, then it will become a laughing stock. So he said, then don't do it. Unless you're expert, then you can do it. So that's a little warning. Okay, so there's lots more, but we have to finish there. So thank you all very much for the opportunity to talk about Srila Prabhupada. I hope that you've all enjoyed the seminars and that you become inspired to sell Prabhupada's books after hearing so much about, you know, the effort that Prabhupada put into his books, the transcendental quality of his books. Then you know, hopefully you'll all become inspired to go out and sell them. You know, otherwise, what's the use? Just keep them all in the warehouse. That's no good. The books are there for two things: reading and then distributing. Prahladananda Maharaj knows that. I just read a letter this morning from Prabhupada to Prahladananda Maharaj. Prahladananda Maharaj, sorry, where he was thanking him very much for selling his books, going out and selling his books, and he's still doing it to this very day. Prahladananda Maharaj ki, Prabhupada ki, Transcendental Book Distribution ki, Go Prema. Sauri Prabhu ki.